They're the business deals that shake things up,
A turning point in corporate history.
that change the way we think,
Hostile takeovers, leveraged buyouts.
and surprise the street.
We're not going to walk away.
1989. A Japanese corporation's desire to purchase a Hollywood movie studio begins an obsessive fight over two unlikely employees,
I was a hairdresser.
I was a designated yakker.
turning Japanese outsiders against American corporate titans,
They got into so much trouble.
and ends with one of the most ferocious boardroom melees in corporate history.
He starts yelling at them.
You know, I'm going to sue.
Crazy.
The cost, a record $6 billion.
No one, trust me, is worth what that deal was.
And from another era, the sale of a beefy southpaw shatters the success of a world-class baseball team.
It's the most despicable thing that could have ever happened to the Boston Red Sox.
Boston fans still believe that my great-grandfather ruined his ball club.
The New York Yankees stalk Babe Ruth, and Sony makes a move on Columbia. Two big deals that break all the rules. September 1988. The Reagan era is coming to a close. The U.S. is enjoying one of the longest economic booms in history. But storm clouds are gathering on the home front. The dollar is falling, the deficit rising. Within 2 years, the United States will be in full recession. Sensing that U.S. properties are ripe for the picking, investors swoop in from the land of the rising sun.
The Japanese had a lot of money. Their wallets were stuffed. They had a lot of buying power.
Beginning in the early 80s, virtually every sector of the mighty U.S. economy is competing with Japan.
The American publics are suffering from what I consider diminished giant syndrome. They used to be giant.
There was a huge national paranoia building across the country that the Japanese were in the process of buying the United States. I mean, they had purchased one after another important American landmarks.
Firestone Tire, New York's Tiffany Building, even a large share of Rockefeller Center are all consumed by Japanese businesses. One of Japan's most aggressive buyers is the Sony Corporation, headed by a new kind of Japanese CEO, Akio Morita, the man responsible for the transistor radio, the Trinitron color TV, and the Walkman.
In a nutshell, Morita was a very honorable person, very honorable man. And he was instrumental in developing Sony from 7-person corporation right after World War II to multi-billion dollars global visible company.
As his Japanese compatriots gobble up American property, Akio Morita and Sony's president, Norio Oga, conceive of an even more ambitious plan. If they can marry Sony hardware with American music and movies, or software as they call them, Sony will control one of the biggest entertainment conglomerates in the world.
Sony saw it as a business that needed hardware and content, and it was going to be about getting the product to the viewer over the wires, through the air. They really thought it was going to be a way to bolster their hardware businesses.
Well, at the time, if you had asked them to explain why they were doing this, they would have said they were in quest of synergy. Because Akio Morita, he knew even then something that is today considered a commonplace of the media business, which is that content is very important.
In 1987, Sony made its first showbiz acquisition, fabled American music label CBS Records. Sony now owned the recordings of American icons such as The Boss, Babs, The Piano Man, and even The Gloved One. Morita is hungry for more. Less than a year later, the Japanese industrialist decides to grab a piece of what many regard as the fountainhead of U.S. culture. The Hollywood movie studio.
You know, Hollywood has, as we all know, a very special kind of appeal to which these particular people on the other side of the Pacific were susceptible, without a doubt.
In the summer of 1988, Sony sends their top U.S. representative, Mickey Schulhoff, to Tinseltown on a quest to find Morita's movie studio. Polished, graceful, with a degree in physics, Schulhoff has been a Sony man for more than a decade. The question is, can he navigate the shark-infested waters of Hollywood?
Mickey Schulhoff was a very clean-cut, double-breasted suit executive. He was the nicest guy, absolutely articulate, but he didn't know much about the entertainment industry.
To compensate for any movie biz naivete, Schulhoff indulges in Hollywood's favorite pastime, schmoozing.
We decided it would be worth our time just to get to know the people in Hollywood. And so what some have called the shopping process, I would characterize more as a familiarization with the key industry leaders.
Mickey, who was also an astute businessman with a developed taste for the flamboyant, was also excited by the proximity this thing gave him to the very inner circle of the Hollywood elite.
In the fall of 1988, after checking out MGM and MCA Universal, Schulhoff believes he has found a studio for Sony. Columbia Pictures. Columbia Pictures is one of America's most illustrious studios, having brought to the big screen both beloved classics and recent blockbusters. It also owns a lucrative television library.
In Columbia's case, that represented about 5,000 full-length motion pictures and about 25,000 hours of television programming.
But Columbia is no longer the brightest star in the Hollywood firmament. It had been acquired by Atlanta-based soft drink company Coca-Cola only 6 years earlier. Like many Tinseltown newcomers, Coke has found the road to stardom a rocky one.
They had management changes. They had big flops. They were having movies like Ishtar. They were changing studio heads all the time. They were just finding it really hard to manage that business from Atlanta.
If some house was on the sales block for a couple of years, and no one else was looking at it, or not buying, and you come along and buy that house, and, wouldn't you assume that there must be something very wrong about the house?
But Sony's top management is unfazed. In the fall, the vice chairman of Sony America, Mickey Schulhoff, is given the go-ahead to make a run at Columbia Pictures. But before serious negotiations begin, Sony CEO Akio Morita insists on one thing. Schulhoff must hire their own hand-picked studio head.
It takes three things to succeed in any kind of business, I would say. Management, management, and management. Sony firmly believes in it, and Japanese tend to believe in that much more strongly than the American counterparts.
This new leader will be handed the keys to Morita's new Hollywood kingdom.
There's only 7 jobs like this. They're powerful jobs. They come with unbelievable perks and expenses.
He decides who to choose to make movies. He decides how much to spend. He puts the whole program together.
That was, of course, a big fat worm. Everybody in the picture had fantasies of becoming that person.
The offices are plush, and aquariums, and this and that, and your parking space.
Who will Sony choose? By midsummer of 1989, Sony believes they have finally found the right man for the job. Michael Ovitz, the super agent and chairman of Creative Artist Agency, which represents the biggest stars in Hollywood. Ovitz had spent nearly a year introducing Schulhoff and Sony to Hollywood. Now he will introduce them to Hollywood deal-making.
One of the critical foundations of closing deals is understanding all the players that are on all sides of the deal. Understanding what the basic economics are for the deal. Understanding how far you think the other side's willing to stretch and how far your side is willing to yield.
Mr. Ovitz had made a proposal which was very expensive.
In the Far East, one of the rules that they play by is they don't like surprises.
Sony is shocked. Morita and Schulhoff reject Ovitz's offer.
It was really a learning mode. It was really trying to understand enough about how Hollywood works and the people in it and the reaction to Sony's coming into the marketplace, that was all part of the learning process.
Besides, Ovitz, was an agent. It wasn't clear that Ovitz was the right man to produce and oversee the production of studio pictures.
Several weeks later, Walter Yetnikoff, the head of Sony's music division, calls Schulhoff with a personal recommendation that will eventually lead not to one candidate, but a remarkable Hollywood duo. John Peters and Peter Guber, a ponytailed lawyer and a former hairdresser, two of the hottest producers in town. And with that friendly advice from a company insider, Sony's quest for their holy grail would take a wild plot twist unimaginable even by Hollywood standards.
Guber and Peters were not qualified to run any movie studio anywhere.